Excellent. Great. Pat, thank you for clarifying that point. I always thought it was Barry and Elliott's and the Jordans deal that resulted in the sweep in 2004. Little did I realize that they just had to get out of town because they hated the Quincy location. Okay, we have time for a few questions. And yes?
Question for Professor Goldman. Are reluctant to participate in future bailout initiatives because of all the strings attached. Have you heard from your clients, or do you foresee any reluctance on the part of hedge funds to get involved in the PPIP and other things because of the regulations might be unilaterally imposed on them as well?
Yeah, I mean, most of our hedge fund clients focus mostly on the TALF program, and Neal can probably speak to this better than I can. The PPIP program is really focused on very large financial institutions, but on the TALF program, a lot of our hedge fund clients were looking at that, and they realized, number one, that the terms were incredibly onerous in terms of the potential government involvement, and they just decided there were too many strings attached. And so the first two closings on the TALF program were significantly below where the expectation was going to be. So I think they're working right now on making the terms more user-friendly, and then I think more hedge funds will participate. But the other point, to your question, hedge funds and other institutions are reluctant to be under further government scrutiny, and they don't know whether this is a slippery slope towards sort of a backdoor regulation.
I'll just comment on the legacy loan program. That's also a major league theme. Some of the banks that would be the sellers of the loan pools, they're already recipients in the program of TARP money. So they're sort of already in for a penny, they're in for a pound. But a major league issue is whether a bank didn't accept the funds, if they sold into the pool, and the idea is to have many banks have an opportunity to sell these pools. They're afraid they're going to pick up these these onerous conditions. And the only statement about it in the framework was that passive investors would not incur these responsibilities. So everyone's gone berserk asking what's a passive investor, because it's anticipated that the organizers of the funds in effect would have management responsibility. So is it can you have one of these funds and be passive is a big issue, but not getting in bed with the government is a major league sort of requirement, and it's reflected in the 419 comments that have been submitted so far.
Mr. Curtin, you said in your lecture that you expected or anticipated about 1,000 or more banks to fail within the next few years. How is that going to affect the FDIC coverage?
Yeah, no, I didn't say that. There was actually an RBC Capital analyst that said it, and I think that number's way high. I think we're going to see historically high numbers of banks, but I think that the vast majority of the failures that we'll see between now and year end will be smallish banks, and maybe there'll be one or two significant ones, but nothing like what we had last year, where we had the first and third largest failures in the history of the United States with WAMU and Indy Mac. Those were big league, failures that in effect expanded the numbers very dramatically. I think we'll see amounts of banks, numbers of banks, but not aggregate assets under the banks.
Will there be enough FDIC coverage? Or is that
absolutely. They're really focused on that, and a collateral comment on these on the PIP programs is, please don't do anything that endangers the FDIC Deposit Insurance Fund by, in effect, mission creep and getting out and guaranteeing debt to these investment funds and so on. So everybody's very focused on it. The FDIC sort of brought down the house with a special assessment that they announced that the banking business went sort of wild about, but they're still working on. They rescinded, receded from that, but they're very much focused on making sure that the fund stays healthy.
Steve?
Yeah, an observation sort of just along the stay away from the TARP money theme is, Neal mentioned the mutuals finally getting their turn, and back in November or so when the capital purchase program was first getting implemented with the public companies and then the private stock banks, the mutuals were all on the sideline feeling sort of unloved and anxious, and when are we going to get our turn? And mass bankers even made a submission to Treasury in terms of this is what the capital instrument should look like. finally comes on in April, and it's a big non-event as far as the mutuals. Virtually all of them are saying, you know, that's nice, but gee, I would have taken it then, but I'm glad I didn't, and I'm not going to take it now. And I think the leadership at Mass Bankers right now is predicting something like not more than maybe 5 or 6 mutuals in Massachusetts are probably even interested in in the program at this point.
Yeah, the issue du jour seems to be, how do you deal with the warrants of the dozens who want to get out of the program? Raising the money like Goldman Sachs,
Yeah.
$5 million, buying back the preferreds is only the first step. The other part is pricing and getting the warrants off of your books, and there's the AB American Bankers Association has a major legislative initiative going in that regard, trying to make the point that, look, from an equitable standpoint, when these preferred investments were infused, after that was done, the deal was rearranged considerably. You know, therefore, it's okay to rearrange it now by giving us our warrants back. That kind of sells from an equitable standpoint. I'm not sure it will sell at all from a political standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, talk about adding insult to injury. You've paid the billions in the preferred dividend, and now you get the privilege to have further dilution of your common.
Right, right. Yes?
With any of the current developments, is there any more clarity as to how the dance will go between the bankers holding assets at 90 cents and hedge funds trying to buy it at a profit? How that may somehow, that gap may be bridged?
Well, it's a bit of a buyer's market. I think the issue for hedge funds is whether they have the capital to be able to do it. But there's no question that there's a lot of pressure right now on bringing down those valuations.
And from the bank perspective, I think there's a major risk that banks, particularly ones participating in TARP, will have a sit down with their friendly regulator, which will tell them, guess what? You may not think that's a great valuation, but we're going to make you mark it down too. You're going to like that less. And like we said, you need to go to private capital before you're going to see anything else from us. So my sense will be that there'll be some banks in the top 19 that are going to be the guinea pigs, if you will, maybe involuntarily to in effect make the administration's promise that this is going to work good. So I think that'll happen.
Quick question for Pat. And this is from Selfinterest, I guess, as a golfer. The U.S. Open and the Ryder Cup seem to be great events. Were they worthy of your list for economic development?
Right. Actually, the Ryder Cup, we had the Ryder Cup here in 1999.
Yeah.
And that was actually an event that we bid on in, I think it was before I got to the Bureau. It was either 89 or 90. So what happens though, just as in all these sporting events, the partners that they request to do the bid are the Convention and Visitors Bureau, because notwithstanding Tony, so we're responsible for getting the hotel rooms. The physical entity in which the event will be played, so whether it's Gillette for lacrosse, or the Garden for basketball, or the Country Club for the PGA. And if it's an NCAA event, you need a lead university. So whenever we do a hockey bid, like a Frozen Four, we align with BU. And when we do a basketball bid, like when we had the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 here last month.
So your organization is in the thick of that.
Yeah, we're in the middle of
Yeah.
it. Now the challenge, there was sort of a window to go back to the PGA, and it related to the Country Club. It was an anniversary. And what tends to happen in these things is they kind of try to match up a historical moment. So the Women's Final Four, when we had it here in 2006, matched up with the 50th anniversary of women's basketball. So they came to a historic site. You know, we would try to do an NBA All-Star Game bid, and the historical element there was the first NBA All-Star Game. They had to beg Brown and Auerbach to take the game because nobody wanted it. Now cities kill each other, and bureaus go after each other trying to get an NBA All-Star.
Yeah. Rich, there's an emerging scandal coming out of New York, where else, right? Around pension funds. and pay to play.
Right.
And it's getting a lot of press because the head of the car czar, Mr. Ratner, apparently paid some of the funds to get investments in his hedge funds. Is that a growing scandal, or will it be confined to New York, do you think?
Well, there's a part of me that hopes that this growing scandal is more business for lawyers. I think it's very isolated. I mean, the pay-to-play notion in the hedge fund industry, it just it's so subject to being caught and scrutinized in this environment. I truly do think it's isolated. But you know, in these tough times, trying to raise capital, you never know.
How are we doing? Discussion before we wrap it up? Okay, we meet again on May 6th. One of our presenters then is going to be Representative Charles Murphy from the fair town of Burlington. Most of you have never heard of him, but you will be hearing of him in coming months and probably years. He is the new chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And as you know, the state budget has been very much in the headlines as we debate whether to have just cuts in the budget, or whether to have a gasoline tax or a sales tax, or God forbid an income tax hike. So he will be here to present. I have spoken to Mike Travellini, who runs the state pension fund. Speaking of pension funds, and he can confirm or deny the isolated nature of this scandal. That's called PRIM, his organization, Pension Reserve Investment Management, I think is the full title, Mike Travellini. He has agreed to present at one of our programs in the very near future. I can't promise him necessarily for May 6th, but possibly. Chris is going to intercede and see if we can get this room, possibly, for May 6th. Watch your email boxes. Any of you that did not sign in and have a business card that you could leave with Lorraine, raise your hand. That would be great. We'll would like to include you on our email list going forward. And grab a sandwich on the way out. And I'd like to just have one round of applause finally for our three excellent presenters.